Have you ever wandered deep into a national park where the trees whisper secrets and the air is unnervingly still? Rangers say the forest never truly sleeps. Some of them have witnessed things that should never have stirred at all. Tonight, you'll hear 7 of the most disturbing real-life park ranger horror stories ever recorded. These tales come straight from reports, radio transmissions, and the first-hand accounts of the men and women who protect the wilderness. Until the wilderness turns on them, they are not for the faint of heart. Nature isn't always peaceful. Sometimes it watches, waits, and tests those who dare to enter. Listen closely, stay alert, and remember, the forest may seem calm, but in the shadows, secrets lurk that only the brave or the unlucky ever witness. Now, the first story begins. It was a cold, gray morning when Ranger Tom Mitchell arrived at his assigned post, a remote trail station deep in the Cascades. The trailhead was miles from the nearest road, surrounded by thick pine forest that seemed to swallow any sound. Tom had worked in the park for over 5 years, but this assignment was different. He was alone, with only a small cabin and a radio to keep him company. No co-workers, no hikers, just the constant whisper of wind through the trees. As he stepped out of his truck, the forest was eerily silent. Birds rarely sang here anymore, and the usual rustle of squirrels was absent. The kind of silence that pressed against your chest, making your heartbeat sound louder than it had any right to. Tom carried his pack, walked up to the tiny cabin perched at the edge of the trail, and checked the logbook. Nothing unusual had been reported for weeks, just the usual. A couple of hikers here and there, a fallen tree blocking a minor path, a bear sighting far down the trail. He made himself a cup of coffee and settled into the cabin, staring out the window. The forest was beautiful, but there was something about it today that felt wrong. The shadows between the trees seemed thicker, darker, almost moving with a life of their own. Hours passed. Tom patrolled the immediate trail around the cabin, marking down fallen branches and checking trail signs. Every step seemed to echo too loudly on the damp earth. Every snapped twig felt magnified. The deeper he went, the heavier the silence became. By mid-afternoon, Tom was back at the cabin, writing in his report. That's when it started. At first, it was just static on the radio, a low crackle that came and went. Tom frowned, fiddling with the knobs. Then he heard it. A scream, faint, distant, almost drowned in the static. He froze. Listened carefully. The sound wasn't like any animal he knew. It was human, but stretched, distorted, like it had traveled 1,000 miles through some unseen forest. "Ranger Mitchell, do you copy?" he said into the mic, voice steady, trying not to show the sudden unease rising in his chest. Only static answered. Tom checked his radio schedule. No hikers had registered in this sector. No lost parties. Yet the screams kept coming, short bursts, repeating, echoing as if bouncing off the mountains themselves. He tried calling in. "Base, I'm hearing something on the trail. I don't see anyone. No hikers, no campers." Again, nothing but static. Then a sharp, piercing scream cut through the air, louder and closer this time. Tom's pulse quickened. He gripped the radio tighter. It sounded like someone, or something, was out there, moving through the trees. The noise wasn't natural. It wasn't just wind or wildlife. It was desperate, terrified, angry. Tom stared at the cabin's small window, straining to see beyond the dense shadows. Every so often, he thought he saw movement, a dark figure slipping behind the trees, too fast to identify. He took a deep breath, trying to calm himself. "Maybe it's a hiker after all," he muttered under his breath. Lost, calling for help. But something about the scream didn't feel human. And deep down, Tom knew he wasn't hearing a lost hiker. The forest was watching, and whatever it was waiting. Tom's pulse raced as he stepped outside the cabin, radio clutched tightly in his hand. The sun was beginning to dip behind the mountains, casting long, twisting shadows across the forest floor. The scream came again, closer this time, a jagged, piercing sound that seemed to seep into his bones. Determined to find the source, Tom started down the trail. His boots crunched on the damp pine needles, but strangely, the forest remained unnaturally quiet otherwise. No birds, no rustling animals, just the sound of his own breathing and the echo of the scream bouncing between the trees. As he followed the noise, something felt off. Trail markers he had memorized now seemed to shift when he looked away, as if the path itself had moved. A rock that had been on the left side of the trail yesterday was now on the right. A fallen branch seemed freshly snapped, pointing him deeper into the darkness. Then he saw it. A piece of torn fabric snagged on a tree branch. It was small, maybe part of a jacket, dark in color. He picked it up, examining it in the fading light. Nothing seemed familiar. No hiker's brand, no ranger issue. Footprints followed, wide, shallow, and oddly uneven. They were human-like at first, but soon the prints grew longer, more elongated, and then vanished into the soft moss, leaving no trace of where they had gone. A cold chill ran down Tom's spine. The forest no longer felt like a place he could navigate safely. He realized he wasn't just tracking a sound. He was being drawn into something that didn't want to be found, yet wanted him to follow. Tom paused on the trail, straining to hear anything beyond the faint rustle of trees. Then the scream came again. But this time, there was something different. It repeated in a strange, mechanical rhythm, as if the sound had been recorded and played back over and over. His stomach twisted. The scream was looping, the same desperate, ear-piercing sound echoing in the canyon walls. Suddenly, movement caught his eye. Between two thick pine trunks, a dark shape crouched low to the ground. At first, he thought it was a bear, but the outline was wrong. Too thin, too tall, limbs oddly bent. Tom froze, holding his breath. The figure didn't move like an animal. It stayed still, watching him. And then, slowly, it lifted its head. He could just make out the shape of something vaguely human, but its face was hidden in shadow. The scream cut out, replaced by a low, hissing sound, almost like the forest itself was exhaling. Tom wanted to run, but his legs felt rooted to the ground. The figure began to shift, moving in a way that defied natural motion, gliding, sliding from tree to tree, yet never fully leaving the shadows. He realized, in a rush of terror, that the sound, the moving trail markers, the footprints, it had been leading him here. And now, he was standing face to face with whatever had been calling out into the forest. Tom stumbled backward, the radio slipping from his grip, static screaming into his ears. The figure melted into the shadows before his eyes, vanishing as suddenly as it had appeared, leaving nothing but the sound of his own ragged breathing and the echoing scream that continued endlessly. The forest, once silent, seemed alive now. The wind rustled violently, branches snapping as if trying to reach him. Every step he took, he heard it again. A voice calling out his name. But it wasn't just any voice. It was his own. "Help me! Help me!" The sound came from every direction, echoing off the trees, bouncing between the mountains. It mimicked him perfectly, the panic in his own tone, the exact words he had whispered earlier into the radio. Heart hammering, Tom tore through the underbrush, stumbling over roots and rocks. He dared not look back, but the sounds followed him. Heavy, deliberate, always just behind. Something was moving fast through the shadows, keeping pace, always silent, until the voice rose again. Louder and more distorted. Hours felt like minutes. The darkness pressed in, and his sense of direction vanished. Every trail he thought he knew twisted into something unfamiliar. Trees that had stood still earlier now seemed to lean toward him, their twisted branches clawing at the sky. The screaming continued, looping, endless. His legs burned, lungs on fire, but he couldn't stop. Somewhere in the distance, he glimpsed the faint outline of his cabin. With a final surge of adrenaline, he sprinted toward it, tripping over a fallen log and crashing to the ground. When he finally reached the cabin, he slammed the door shut behind him, pressing his back against it, chest heaving, trembling uncontrollably. Outside, the screams faded, only to leave a ringing silence that seemed worse than the noise. Tom was found at dawn by a relief ranger, huddled near the cabin, pale, shaking, and unable to speak for several minutes. His eyes were wide, haunted, as though he had seen something no one else could ever imagine. When he finally calmed, he tried to describe what had happened, but words failed him. He only muttered about the screams, the shape, the voice, and the feeling that the forest had been following him. Weeks later, audio logs from his radio were reviewed. To everyone's horror, the recordings didn't stop when Tom had fled. The screaming continued for hours, repeating the same phrases, his own voice calling for help long after he was safely back in the cabin. The post was eventually abandoned. Tom never returned, and those who later hiked the trail claim that sometimes, when the wind is right, you can still hear a voice calling your name, echoing endlessly through the trees. Rangers Lisa Harper and Jake Reynolds had been assigned a project deep in Yellowstone National Park to restore old patrol cabins that had long fallen into disrepair. Most were straightforward, abandoned structures with weathered walls and creaking floors. But one cabin stood out, cabin number 9. It wasn't on any modern map. GPS units couldn't locate it, and even older park records mentioned it only in passing, tucked away in a dense section of forest rarely visited by hikers or staff. When Lisa and Jake arrived, the forest was unusually quiet. Pine needles carpeted the ground, muffling their footsteps. The air smelled damp and cold, with a faint tang of decaying wood and moss. The cabin looked untouched, as if someone had walked away decades ago and never returned. Its wooden walls were intact, surprisingly sturdy, but windows were clouded with dirt, and the door creaked ominously when they pushed it open. Sunlight barely reached the interior, leaving shadows dancing across the floor. Lisa shivered. "It feels wrong in here," she whispered. Jake nodded, trying to shake the uneasy feeling creeping over him. "It's just old," he said. "We're here to restore it. Nothing more." But as soon as they stepped inside, it became clear that this cabin was different. The interior was like stepping back in time. Dust-covered furniture, a rusted stove, and shelves lined with jars and cans, most of them long expired. On a small table in the corner lay personal items: a wallet, a faded photograph, a pocket watch, all dated from the 1950s. Someone had clearly lived here once and left in a hurry. Then Lisa noticed a diary on a shelf, leather-bound and cracked with age. She opened it carefully, flipping through the pages filled with tight, meticulous handwriting. Most entries were mundane. Notes about weather, patrols, and wildlife. But one passage made her stop cold. "The Watchers are always here, in the woods. They see everything. They move when you don't look. I can hear them whispering my name at night. We cannot leave." Jake leaned over, reading the lines. feeling the hair rise on the back of his neck. Neither spoke for a long moment. The air in the cabin suddenly felt heavier, oppressive, as though the walls themselves were listening. A faint scratching sound came from outside. Light, almost like fingertips tapping against the wooden wall. Both of them froze, glancing at each other. The forest around cabin number 9 was alive in ways they hadn't expected. And somehow, it felt as if the cabin itself was waiting, watching, for them to discover something they were never meant to find. The first few days in cabin number 9 were uneventful, quiet, almost too quiet. Lisa and Jake unpacked supplies, measured walls, and began the slow process of restoration. But soon, things started to feel off. Tools they left neatly on the table would disappear, only to reappear hours later in places they hadn't been. A hammer might be on the workbench one minute, and the next, it would be lying on the floor near the stove. Nails, brushes, and even their backpacks seemed to move on their own at night. The cabin became a theater of unsettling sounds. Footsteps circled the cabin, soft and deliberate, sometimes brushing against the roof. At first, they thought it was wildlife. Raccoons, bears, or even squirrels. But the rhythm and weight didn't match any animal they knew. One evening, Jake approached the door to check for tracks. That's when they noticed them. Deep, jagged claw marks scratched into the wooden doorframe just above eye level. They hadn't been there the day before. Lisa whispered, "That's not an animal." Jake's voice was tight with fear. "Whatever it is, it's been inside and it's been watching us." The forest outside the cabin seemed to hold its breath. Shadows stretched unnaturally across the walls, and every snapping twig outside sounded like someone pacing just beyond the tree line. By the 7th night, tension had reached its peak. Lisa was alone in the cabin while Jake went to collect supplies from the nearby trail. Around midnight, she heard it, soft tapping on the window, slow and rhythmic. Not random, but deliberate, almost intelligent. She froze, listening as the sound continued, her heart pounded in her chest. With trembling hands, she grabbed a flashlight and shone it toward the window. The tapping stopped instantly, silence. She lowered the beam, thinking it might have been an animal. The moment she turned back, the tapping started again, this time slightly faster, moving across the window pane in a pattern she couldn't understand. Frozen in fear, Lisa realized the sound was waiting for her to react. She dared not call for Jake. The forest seemed to press against the cabin walls, thick and heavy, like it had closed in on her, minutes stretched into what felt like hours. Finally, the tapping stopped. Silence returned. But when Jake came back at dawn, Lisa could barely speak, shaking as she recounted the night they both knew something was out there. Something watching and waiting. Cabin number 9 wasn't just abandoned, it was alive. As the first light of dawn crept over the trees, Lisa and Jake knew they couldn't stay another night in cabin number 9. They packed only the essentials, moving quickly but quietly, glancing over their shoulders at the dense forest. The silence around them was heavy, almost suffocating, and every rustle of leaves made them jump. As they retraced their path, they passed other cabins they had restored in the past week. Each one was exactly as it should be. Doors intact, windows clear, no sign of movement. But when they checked their GPS out of habit, cabin number 9 had vanished. Coordinates that had once guided them to the small wooden structure now led only to thick undergrowth. The cabin was gone, as if it had never existed. Lisa stopped, staring at the empty clearing. "It's like it disappeared," she whispered. Jake nodded silently, a chill running down his spine. They didn't speak again until they reached the safety of the main park road. Whatever had been in that forest, whatever had been watching them, was left behind, along with the cabin itself. Back at park headquarters, they filed their report. The unusual occurrences, the diary, the claw marks, everything. Their superior read it quietly, then looked up at them with a grim expression. "We don't talk about number 9, he said. "You did the right thing leaving it alone. That's all you need to know." Years passed. Lisa and Jake moved on to other assignments. But the memory of that cabin never left them. Then, years later, a veteran ranger mentioned seeing cabin number 9 marked again on a map. This time listed as an active duty post, staffed by someone, somewhere, deep in the forest. But no one knew who was stationed there, and no one could confirm the cabin's location. It was as if the forest itself had reclaimed its secret, choosing who was allowed to see it, and who would be left wondering. It was the summer of 1989 when the alarm went out. A child had gone missing in Olympic National Park. Rangers from nearby stations were quickly mobilized, 6 of them, experienced, trained, and familiar with the forest, set out together, determined to find the lost boy before nightfall. The park was dense, a tangle of evergreens, ferns, and moss-covered ground. Mist hung low in the valleys, softening the sounds of their boots on the wet soil. Even with experience, the rangers couldn't shake a creeping sense of unease. They called out, methodically scanning the area. Radios hummed faintly, repeating short bursts of static between calls. Birds were silent, the forest holding its breath. As the sun dipped behind the trees, a strange fog began to roll in, unusually thick, almost unnatural. It clung to the forest floor, curling around trunks, twisting paths they had walked just minutes before. The team pressed on, their flashlights cutting through the dim light, every sense on high alert. It felt like the forest itself had shifted overnight, making the familiar terrain feel alien and unwelcoming. By late afternoon, 3 of the rangers, Tom, Carl, and Denise, had pushed ahead toward a ridge where the child was last seen. They radioed back to the others, their voices calm at first, then strained. We're in a fog. Can't see more than 20 feet. Keep the others on standby." Tom's voice crackled through the static. A few minutes later, a panicked call cut through the radio. "Something's moving in here. I don't..." The transmission ended abruptly, replaced by nothing but static. Lisa and Mark, who had stayed behind, tried to call them back. "Tom, Carl, Denise, do you copy?" Shocker's silence. Minutes stretched into agonizing hours. The fog didn't lift. Their radios remained dead, as if the forest itself had swallowed not just the rangers, but their voices by nightfall. 3 of the 6 had vanished without a trace. GPS trackers showed their positions, all stationary at first, then moving in perfect, impossible circles, looping endlessly through the trees. The remaining rangers huddled together, fear gripping them like ice. They realized this was no ordinary search. Something in the forest had claimed the others, leaving behind only whispers in the fog, and a chilling emptiness where the team had once stood. As night fell over Olympic National Park, the remaining rangers frantically studied the GPS trackers of the 3 missing colleagues. What they saw made their stomachs turn. The trackers showed the rangers moving, but in perfect, unnatural circles. For 3 straight hours, every step repeated the same pattern, as if the forest itself was rearranging their path. Each circle seemed to tighten, constricting, forcing them closer to some unseen center. The trees around the trail seemed taller, denser, casting shadows that bent in impossible ways. Lisa whispered, "It's like they're trapped." like the forest is holding them inside an invisible cage. Mark nodded grimly, eyes scanning the foggy darkness. And whatever's doing this, it doesn't want us to find them. The more they studied the coordinates, the more it became clear. This wasn't a normal disorientation. Something was manipulating the very space around them, warping the forest, keeping the missing rangers lost. Hours later, as dawn broke and the fog began to lift, search teams finally reached the area where the three had vanished. What they found was impossible. Their camp was completely untouched. The fire they had built the night before was still burning gently, smoke curling lazily into the morning air. Their radios lay on the table, powered on. No signs of damage. But there was no sign of the rangers. No footprints leaving the clearing. Not a single mark in the soft, damp earth suggested they had walked away. It was as if the forest itself had swallowed them whole, leaving only the illusion that they had ever been there. The search team huddled together, staring at the camp, unable to explain what had happened. The child they were searching for was still missing. But now, 3 trained rangers had joined the growing list of unexplained vanishings in the park. The forest, silent and watchful, seemed to stretch endlessly around them, hiding something that refused to be found, yet leaving behind evidence that terror had walked there. Weeks after the incident, park officials recovered audio logs from the radios of the missing rangers. The recordings were eerie and disjointed, at first static, low, crackling, almost normal. Then came the whispers, faint, distorted, impossible to ignore. Turn back. Turn back. The voice repeated itself over and over, sometimes overlapping, as if coming from multiple directions at once. It wasn't just a warning. It felt alive, deliberate, demanding. The search team scoured the forest for the missing rangers and the lost child. But neither was ever found. The dense trees, fog, and undergrowth seemed to swallow every trace. The recordings were archived, but many who heard them later reported a lingering sense of dread. Even in the safety of a radio room, the whispers made it feel as if the forest was still reaching through the static, claiming what it wanted. Of the 6 rangers who had gone into the forest that day, only 3 returned physically, but all were haunted. One survivor, Lisa Harper, resigned just days after the search, unable to shake the terror that gripped her memory. In her official statement, she said, "The forest doesn't lose people. It takes them. And when it does, you never hear from them again. You don't just get lost here, you vanish." Her words sent shivers through the park community. From that day forward, rangers spoke of the area in hushed tones. Even now, locals avoid that section of Olympic National Park, whispering that some things in the woods are not meant to be found, and that those who disappear are never truly gone. The forest remained, silent and watchful, holding its secrets tightly among the trees, forever hiding the missing and forever warning those who dared enter. It was a crisp, moonlit night when Alex Monroe reported for his first solo patrol as a park ranger along a remote stretch of the Appalachian Trail. Fresh from the academy, eager and confident, Alex had trained for years, but nothing could prepare him for the isolation he would face tonight. His assignment was straightforward: monitor the trail for poachers and suspicious activity, a standard protocol that had rarely seen any real danger. Until now, the forest was quiet, almost too quiet. The usual sounds of nocturnal animals, owls, raccoons, distant deer, were muted, as if the trees themselves had swallowed every sound. Alex checked his gear: flashlight, radio, binoculars, and a notebook for patrol logs. The path ahead was narrow and twisted, flanked by towering trees whose branches clawed at the sky. Shadows pooled in the gaps, shifting with the wind, forming shapes that made him second-guess every step. As he walked, he tried to keep his mind on routine. Check the trail signs, scan the area for tracks, make note of anything unusual. But with each step, an uneasy feeling settled in his chest, a creeping awareness that he was not alone. The trail stretched into darkness ahead, unbroken and endless. Alex took a deep breath, gripping his flashlight tighter. Tonight, he was the only person standing between the quiet of the forest and whatever threats lurked in its shadows, and he had no idea how quickly the night would turn into a nightmare. Hours into his patrol, Alex began noticing something strange. At first, it was subtle. A shift in the shadows between the trees, a silhouette that didn't belong. He would catch glimpses of a tall black shape standing motionless just beyond the trail, always at the edge of his flashlight's beam. He stopped, shining the light directly at it, but each time it vanished, leaving only the rustle of leaves and the sway of branches in the wind. Alex's heart began to race. He told himself it was just his imagination. Nerves, shadows, tricks of the moonlight. But the figure kept appearing, always in the same spot, always perfectly still, as if it were waiting for him to notice. The deeper he went, the more he felt eyes on him, unseen yet heavy, pressing against him from the darkness. Every snapped twig, every falling leaf made him start, convinced that the shape had moved closer. Though each time he looked, it remained just beyond reach. By midnight, the presence was undeniable. The forest around him felt alive, aware. The black figure loomed in the distance, silent and unwavering, a shadow that didn't belong to any natural tree, animal, or person. Alex's grip on his flashlight tightened. He whispered into the radio, trying to sound calm. All clear. Just a routine patrol. Nothing unusual. But deep down, he knew. Something was watching. Something patient, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. As the night deepened, the forest seemed to shift around Alex. His radio, which had been quiet except for routine chatter, began to glitch. Static crackled through the speaker, sometimes forming words, faint, distorted, almost human, and then vanished. Alex glanced at his compass, expecting it to point north instead. The needle spun wildly, jerking in impossible directions. Every attempt to get a reading failed, leaving him disoriented and unnerved. The shadows under the trees seemed to move independently of the moonlight. A branch that had cast a long shadow moments before now stretched differently, almost as if something was bending the darkness itself. Shapes shifted at the corner of his eyes, tall, thin, and impossibly still, always just beyond his flashlight beam. The forest's normal rhythm of night sounds had stopped. No birds, no rustling animals, only the unnatural whisper of the wind through the branches. Every instinct in Alex screamed that he was no longer just walking through the forest. Something unseen was warping the very space around him, twisting sound, light, and direction into a trap. He whispered into the radio again, trying to reach headquarters. "This is Ranger Monroe. I'm not sure where I am." Only static answered, punctuated by faint, almost mocking whispers that seemed to echo his own words back at him. Alex realized with a sinking dread, the shadow wasn't just watching. It was controlling the environment, and he was already inside its grip. Alex's heart raced as he pressed deeper into the forest, senses straining for any sign of normality. Then it moved. The tall, black shape he had glimpsed all night shifted, faster than any human or animal could. It darted between the trees in sudden, impossible bursts, appearing and disappearing with each blink of his eyes. Every time he raised his flashlight to catch a clear view, something even stranger happened. The beam didn't behave normally. It bent around the shape, curving as if the light itself refused to illuminate it. Branches that should have been illuminated cast long, unnatural shadows. The forest seemed alive, responding to the shadow's presence. Alex tried to call for backup over his radio, but static and whispers answered instead. Faint echoes of his own voice, twisted and mocking. The shadows seemed to follow his every movement, always at the edge of vision, never fully visible. The air around him grew colder, heavier, as if the space itself was being compressed. A snapping twig behind him made him whirl around, flashlight trembling in his hands. But there was nothing. Only the shifting shadows, and the sense of being watched by something far older and more cunning than any living creature Alex realized, with a growing, icy dread that this wasn't a random encounter. The shadow was aware of him, toying with him, drawing him further into its forest, deeper into the unknown. Alex froze, every muscle in his body rigid. From the darkness, a sound emerged, faint, soft, almost like the wind passing through the trees. At first, he thought it was his imagination. But then he heard it clearly. Alex. The whisper wasn't just a name called out. It was his own voice, the exact tone, the same hesitation, the same tremor he had been trying to suppress all night. His flashlight flickered as his heart pounded in his chest. Every instinct screamed to run, but fear rooted him in place. The whisper repeated, closer this time, circling him in the darkness. Alex, come closer. It was mocking, taunting, impossibly familiar. The shadow moved silently between the trees. Its presence felt rather than seen. Every time he turned toward it, the darkness seemed to stretch and shift, keeping the figure just beyond reach. Alex stumbled backward, voice trembling as he whispered into the radio. I need help. Someone. Anyone. Only static answered, punctuated by his own voice, whispering back at him from the speakers, distorted, warped, repeating his fear. The forest around him seemed to pulse with awareness. The shadow wasn't just hiding, it was speaking, mimicking, controlling, and drawing him deeper into the trap it had laid. Alex realized with bone-deep dread that the forest had claimed him as its own, and that the shadow was far more than just a shape between the trees. By dawn, the forest seemed calm again, as if nothing had happened. But for Alex Monroe, the night had left an indelible mark. His colleagues found him near a bend in the trail, kneeling on the ground, unresponsive. His eyes were wide open, staring past the trees, empty yet filled with a terror that couldn't be named. When they approached, he didn't move, didn't speak. Only his body cam, still recording, told the story. The footage showed nothing but darkness. Not a shadow, not a branch, not a hint of what had happened. Then, through the static of the recording, Alex's voice could be heard, quiet, broken, and trembling. It found me. He was taken immediately from the trail, evaluated by park authorities and medical personnel. But no one could explain the expression on his face, the rigid posture, or the sheer panic that seemed to radiate from him. Alex never returned to night patrols. Colleagues whispered about the forest along that stretch of the Appalachian Trail, and some still avoided entirely. The shadow remained unseen, yet its presence lingered in the minds of those who heard Alex's final words, a chilling reminder that some things in the forest are not just hidden, they are waiting. In the remote wilderness of Montana, a small ranger station had stood for decades, monitoring the surrounding forest for fires, poachers, and hikers in distress. But one morning, headquarters noticed something unusual. All communication with the station had gone silent. No radio check-ins, no status reports. 48 hours passed with no word. Concerned, the park authorities sent a relief team, 3 rangers experienced in deep forest operations, to investigate. The journey to the station was long and treacherous. Dense pines, snow-dusted paths, and winding trails slowed their progress. Even with maps and GPS, the forest seemed endless, vast, and eerily quiet. When they finally arrived, the station was exactly as it should have been from the outside. Intact walls, no signs of struggle, and a small trail of footprints leading to the door. But the door itself was unlocked, slightly ajar, and silence greeted them inside. No chatter, no movement, no life. Not a single ranger was there. Desks were undisturbed. Logs sat open with pens still resting on the pages, and radios lay powered on, but lifeless. The coffee pot on the counter was cold. Untouched, the relief team called out, expecting a response. Silence. Something felt off. The air inside the station was heavy, stale, and smelled faintly of burnt wood, though there had been no fire. It was as if the station had been abandoned in an instant. Yet no one had left, and nothing had been taken. A creeping unease settled over the team. This wasn't just a missing station. Something unseen had claimed it, leaving only the echoes of its presence behind. The relief team stepped inside cautiously, expecting to find the missing rangers. At first glance, everything appeared normal. The doors were wide open, letting in a thin, cold breeze from the surrounding forest. The generator hummed quietly, powering lights and equipment as if someone had just left. Food sat on the counter, warm to the touch. Freshly prepared coffee mugs still held the faint aroma of a recent brew. Yet, no one was there. Chairs were tucked neatly under tables. Desks were organized, papers stacked in perfect order. Radios and computers were powered on, displaying nothing but routine system checks. The absence of life felt deafening. There were no footsteps, no voices, no indication that anyone had been present to maintain this station. The relief team called out, their voices echoing unnaturally in the empty space. "Hello? Ranger station? Anyone here?" Only the hum of the generator and the faint rustle of papers answered. As they moved through the station, an unsettling realization began to sink in. Everything had been left as if frozen in time. No struggle, no signs of evacuation, nothing stolen. It was as though the staff had vanished into thin air, and the station, alive with lights, warmth, and power, was silently waiting for them to discover the emptiness within. As the relief team searched the empty station, one of them noticed a small digital recorder tucked under a stack of patrol logs. It was switched on, playing a continuous loop of forest sounds, birds chirping, wind rustling through the trees, distant animal calls. On its own, it might have seemed harmless. But then they heard it. Faint human breathing beneath the natural sounds, slow, deliberate, almost imperceptible at first, but growing more distinct the longer they listened. The team exchanged uneasy glances. The breathing wasn't their own. It wasn't echoing from the room. It was in the recording itself, layered beneath the peaceful forest sounds, like someone had been trapped there and forced to listen. Lisa, the most experienced of the group, whispered, This is impossible. Who recorded this? And why?" The recorder repeated the loop endlessly. Each cycle began with the same forest sounds, but the breathing persisted, constant and haunting. Occasionally, a faint whisper could be detected, words indistinct, just beyond comprehension. The relief team grew tense, realizing the station wasn't just abandoned. It was haunted by presence, captured in the simplest, most subtle way. A recording that should have been benign, yet carried something deeply wrong beneath it. No one spoke. The forest sounds played on, but the human breathing made the silence of the station feel alive, watching, waiting. The relief team found the CCTV monitors tucked in a small security room. At first, the footage seemed ordinary. Rangers moving about the station, performing their duties, but as they watched closer, a chilling pattern emerged. The Rangers appeared to stand completely still for hours, motionless as if frozen in time. Every minute passed on the clocks, yet they didn't move, didn't speak, didn't interact. Then, one by one, they slowly walked toward the doors, not a word, not a glance back. Each ranger stepped outside into the dense, rolling fog surrounding the station. The camera captured nothing unusual outside. No footprints in the soft earth, no movement in the trees. It was as if the rangers had simply merged with the mist, vanishing into the gray haze. The footage looped repeatedly, showing the same sequence over and over, each playback as unnerving as the first. The relief team's unease grew. The station had been abandoned for 2 days. Yet the CCTV suggested something deliberate had drawn the rangers outside, into the fog, where no trace remained. The forest beyond the station seemed to watch silently, waiting as if it had claimed those who had walked into it without leaving a single mark. Before the relief team left the station, they reviewed the last radio logs from the missing rangers. The recordings were brief, fragmented, but each one carried a weight of dread. The final transmission was the most disturbing of all. A ranger's voice, calm at first, grew strained and panicked. Between static and crackling interference, the words came through clearly. Don't look at it." Then the transmission cut off abruptly. Silence followed. No background noise, no static, nothing. The relief team shivered. The station had been alive with lights, warmth, and signs of life. Yet the rangers had vanished, as if pulled into the fog outside. No trace of them was ever found. Their disappearance remained one of the most chilling mysteries in the Montana wilderness. A reminder that some forces in the forest are unseen, silent, and merciless. Even years later, park rangers avoid that section of forest after dark, whispering the warning left on the final transmission. Don't look at it. The forest stands still, watching, patient, and forever keeping its secrets hidden in the mist. The disappearance of the rangers at the Montana station was officially closed after weeks of investigation. The public statement was simple and unremarkable. Animal attack suspected, no further action required. But inside the park's internal communications, a different story emerged. A leaked memo revealed something far more unsettling. Unexplainable auditory phenomenon observed, personnel vanished without trace. Further investigation restricted. The contrast between the official report and the internal note left a chilling impression on those who read it. The forest had claimed the rangers, leaving behind warmth, light, and life. Yet they were gone, as if erased. Those familiar with the station now speak of it only in whispers. Hikers avoid the area after dark. Even experienced rangers hesitate to patrol the surrounding forest, uneasy at the thought that some forces are beyond explanation, beyond control. The Montana wilderness remains silent, but it is never empty. The missing rangers serve as a haunting reminder. Some mysteries in the forest are meant to remain unsolved. It began as a routine survey, of a sinkhole formation near Lookout Point. Ranger Ethan Clark and geologist Dr. Mara Jennings were exploring the area, mapping geological features and checking the stability of the terrain. The day was clear, the sun casting long shadows over the uneven ground. As they approached a dense thicket near the edge of the sinkhole, Mara's foot slipped over a hidden depression. Peering down, she noticed a dark opening, a cave entrance, partially hidden by overgrowth and debris. Curiously, they checked the park maps. There was no record of a cave system in this location. Nothing. With flashlights ready and ropes secured, Ethan and Mara carefully descended. The entrance opened into a narrow tunnel that quickly expanded into a vast chamber. Stalactites hung like jagged teeth from the ceiling, and the air smelled damp and ancient. The walls were marked with unusual scratches and faint, dark stains. The floor was littered with small bones, animal at first glance, though some looked oddly human. As they ventured further, the light from the entrance disappeared behind them, leaving only the beam of their flashlights to pierce the darkness. Every step echoed unnaturally, as if the cave itself was amplifying their movements. Listening, neither spoke at first. The discovery was remarkable, scientifically significant, but an undercurrent of unease ran through them. Something about the cave felt wrong. Ethan tightened his grip on his flashlight. Mara whispered, "This wasn't supposed to be here. None of this should exist." They pressed on, unaware that the cave was more than just uncharted geology. Something ancient, hidden and patient lurked in the darkness, waiting for intruders to stumble into its lair. As Ethan and Mara moved deeper into the cave, the atmosphere shifted. The air grew colder with each step, a biting chill that made their breath visible in the flashlight beams. The walls were covered in strange markings, scratches and symbols that didn't match any known language or indigenous art. Bones were scattered across the floor, but they weren't random. Some were carefully arranged in patterns, forming circles and lines that suggested deliberate placement. Small stones were stacked atop them, like offerings or warnings. Ethan's flashlight flickered suddenly, casting the chamber in near darkness. Shadows leapt across the walls, creating shapes that seemed to twist and move independently. Mara's hands shook as she tried to steady her light, and the beam dimmed again, leaving them in near total darkness. For a few tense seconds, the cave seemed alive. The temperature dropped even further, pressing against them like invisible hands. Every echo of their footsteps sounded louder, more deliberate, as though the cave itself was watching and listening. A low, almost imperceptible hum began to vibrate through the walls, deep and resonant, like the growl of something massive. Far below the surface, Mara whispered, her voice tight. "Ethan, I don't think we're alone down here." Ethan didn't respond immediately. His flashlight swept the chamber again, catching shadows that shifted too quickly to be natural. Whatever had left the markings and arranged the bones might still be here, and they had no idea how far it extended or how patient it had been, waiting in the darkness. As Ethan and Mara ventured further, the cave seemed to grow darker, colder, and unnervingly quiet, until they heard it. Faint at first, almost lost beneath the drip of water and the echo of their own footsteps, came the sound of voices. Soft murmurs, distant, unintelligible, echoing through the twisting tunnels. Then one voice stood out, a child's cry, fragile, desperate, and unbearably real. It echoed off the stone walls, bouncing through the cavern, seeming to come from multiple directions at once. Mara froze, her flashlight trembling in her hands. That's a child," she whispered. It can't be real." Ethan gripped her shoulder, forcing himself to listen. The crying was followed by faint whispers, indistinct words that seemed to be calling their names. Ethan. Mara. Each step they took to investigate made the voices grow closer, yet the sounds seemed to shift and evade them. The child's cry would vanish behind a wall, only to reappear faintly from another tunnel. The cave seemed alive, manipulating sound, bending reality. Every instinct screamed for them to leave, but their curiosity and duty to investigate kept them moving forward. Deep inside, a horrifying thought took root. The voices weren't just echoes. Someone, or something, was luring them in, using the cries of the lost to draw them deeper into the dark. The cave was no longer just a geological discovery. It had become a trap. The deeper Ethan and Mara went, the more the cave seemed to resist them. The walls were now covered with countless handprints, small and large, human and inhuman, smeared in dark stains that seemed older than any living memory. They traced patterns, leading deeper into twisting tunnels that seemed to stretch farther than any map could account for. Unease grew into fear. Mara whispered, "We should turn back, now." But when they tried, the path they had just walked had shifted. The tunnels twisted unnaturally. Passages that had been straight now angled in impossible directions. Every landmark they thought they recognized had changed. The air became damp and heavy, pressing against them like the cave itself was alive. Footsteps echoed behind them, though they were alone. Shadows flickered along the walls, moving independently of their flashlights. Ethan's voice trembled as he said, "It's like the cave doesn't want us to leave." With every step deeper, the whispers grew louder, unintelligible murmurs surrounding them from all directions. The handprints seemed to multiply, new marks appearing on the walls they had passed only moments ago. It was no longer just exploration. They were descending into a labyrinth controlled by something ancient, patient, and aware. Something that wanted them to lose themselves in the darkness forever. Panic set in as the tunnels seemed to twist endlessly. Ethan and Mara realized they had gone too far, and the cave was no longer a place of discovery. It was a trap they ran, following the faintest traces of the entrance. But the passages shifted as if the cave itself was alive, forcing them deeper. Shadows loomed from every corner, twisting unnaturally. Whispers echoed all around, and distant cries, some human, some unrecognizable, urged them onward in terror. Mara tripped over uneven rock and fell. Ethan reached for her, but the darkness seemed to pull her back. Her flashlight rolled across the floor, illuminating fleeting glimpses of something crawling along the ceiling. A mass of black, gliding effortlessly above them. Ethan scrambled, dragging himself toward the entrance. Behind him, the cave seemed to groan and shift, as though mocking their escape. Finally, gasping and bleeding, Ethan emerged into the daylight, the cold air of the surface striking him like a shock. Mara was nowhere to be seen. Days later, when authorities reviewed Mara's helmet camera, the footage revealed something horrifying. Shadows crawled across the ceiling, limbs, shapes, and forms that should not exist. They moved with purpose, and at times seemed to pause, watching the camera as if aware it had been left behind. Mara was never found, leaving only the footage as a chilling testament to what lurked in the cave beneath Lookout Point. A week after the incident, Ethan Clark resigned from the Park Service. He avoided the media and refused to discuss details with colleagues, except for a single chilling statement during an internal debrief. "That wasn't a cave," he said, voice low and shaking. It was a mouth. It was alive, and it wanted to swallow us." His words left everyone in the room unsettled. Geologists, rangers, and investigators struggled to interpret the statement, dismissing it as trauma-induced fear. Until Mara's helmet footage resurfaced, watching the black shapes crawling along the ceiling, their deliberate, almost predatory movements. Ethan's confession took on a terrifying clarity. The cave hadn't been a natural formation. It had been a living entity, patient and cunning, consuming anyone who ventured too far inside. Ethan never returned to fieldwork. The entrance to the cave was sealed, but locals and hikers report strange echoes and distant cries when the wind blows through Lookout Point. Some say the cave waits, patient and hungry, ready for its next intruders. For 10 days, veteran ranger Daniel Harper had been stationed alone in a remote fire watch tower, high above the forest. The structure stood isolated on a ridge, surrounded by miles of dense pine and rugged terrain. From this vantage point, he monitored the forest for smoke, fires, and any unusual activity. His only companions, the wind, birds, and the occasional rustle of distant wildlife. The solitude was both calming and unnerving. Days passed slowly, the silence broken only by the creak of the tower and the faint crackle of his radio. At first, everything seemed routine. Daniel logged observations, noted wildlife movements, and checked the horizon for any signs of danger. But as night fell on the third day, something changed. The forest below, usually alive with the sounds of nocturnal animals, fell completely silent. Not a single bird, not a distant howl, nothing. Daniel strained his ears, scanning the tree line. A feeling settled over him, the kind of unease that comes from knowing you're not entirely alone, even when no one is around. High in the tower, surrounded by the emptiness of the ridge, he began to sense a presence. Subtle, patient, and watching. Something in the forest was aware of him. And over the next several nights, that awareness would grow into something far more terrifying than solitude. Night after night, Daniel's vigilance was rewarded with a disturbing sight. From his tower, faint flickers of light appeared deep in the forest, like distant fires burning just beyond the trees. At first, he assumed they were small campfires or controlled burns, but something about them felt off. Every time he reported the lights over the radio, patrols were dispatched to investigate. Each time, they returned with the same report. Nothing. No flames, no smoke, not a trace of fire. Yet the lights always returned after dark, flickering in the same pattern. As if deliberately drawing attention, Daniel's unease grew. The lights weren't random. They moved with intent, appearing and disappearing in ways that defied natural explanation. Sometimes, he thought he could make out figures moving near them. Silhouettes too tall and thin to be human, vanishing when observed directly. The isolation of the tower amplified the terror. Alone, with the wind howling around the structure, Daniel began to wonder if the lights were a warning or an invitation. By the fifth night, he was certain of one thing. Something in the forest was aware of him, watching, waiting. Daniel began to notice a terrifying pattern. Each night, the same flickering light appeared in the forest, always in roughly the same location. At first distant, then gradually inching closer to the tower, no matter where he reported it or how patrols scoured the area. The fire remained elusive, always reappearing. It was as if the forest itself was moving the light, guiding it toward him. Some nights, he could swear he saw movement around the fire. Dark, elongated shapes slipping between the trees, always just beyond the range of recognition. Other nights, the forest was eerily silent, the only illumination coming from that steady, creeping glow. Daniel's sleep was haunted by dreams of the lights in them. They surrounded him, burning higher and closer, accompanied by whispers he could almost understand. Like the forest itself was speaking in a language older than time. With every passing night, the lights inched nearer, and Daniel's unease grew into fear. Something was approaching. Something patient, intelligent, and determined to reach the tower. And him. On the seventh night, Daniel finally saw the truth, and it froze him in place. Through his binoculars, he spotted a flickering glow in the distance. At first, he thought it was another false fire, another trick of the forest. But as he focused, his blood ran cold. It wasn't just a fire, it was his own tower, burning from the base up. Flames licked the structure, smoke curling into the night sky. Yet when he looked down at his tower, it remained untouched, perfectly intact. Panic surged. The lights weren't distant. They were mirroring him. They weren't random. They were showing him what could happen. Every instinct screamed at him to flee, but the ridge was isolated and the nearest patrol was hours away. Daniel realized that the fire, the lights, the creeping silhouettes, they weren't just approaching. They were teaching, warning, or perhaps hunting. The forest had become a reflection of himself, a place where reality twisted and the tower, his only refuge, could burn, even while it stood. From that moment, he knew the forest wasn't just watching. It was alive, aware, and far more dangerous than anything he had ever faced. The storm hit without warning. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the ridge and the surrounding forest in harsh, fleeting flashes. Daniel awoke to the acrid smell of smoke curling into the tower. His heart raced as he scrambled to the window. The fire was real. Not the distant illusion he had seen before, but right at his tower, flames devouring the wooden structure, sparks flying into the night air. Panic gripped him. He grabbed the radio, sending an urgent distress call. "This is Harper. Firewatch Tower. We need immediate evacuation. Fire is..." Static cut through his voice. The storm roared louder. And then, between the crackle and hiss of flames, he whispered, almost to himself, "It's not the fire that's coming. It's what's inside it." The heat intensified. Shadows danced unnaturally in the flickering light, stretching from the burning trees toward the tower. The shapes were too tall, too deliberate, moving with purpose. Daniel realized that the forest, the lights, the creeping shapes, it wasn't just a fire he was facing. Something ancient, intelligent, and malevolent had been waiting in the flames, using them as a lure. The last thing transmitted over the radio before the line went dead was his voice, trembling, filled with raw terror. "It's inside it. It's coming for me." By morning, the tower was reduced to smoldering ruins. Daniel Harper was gone. Only the echoes of that final radio transmission remained, a chilling reminder that in the forest, some fires are not meant to burn. They are meant to consume. When a search team reached the ridge days later, they expected to find ruins, ash and charred timber. Instead, the Firewatch Tower stood intact, untouched by flames, as if the fire had never existed, not a single scorch mark. The surrounding forest was pristine, silent, and unbroken. Daniel Harper was nowhere to be found. No trace of him, no footprints, no belongings, nothing. Only the empty tower remained, watching over the forest as if mocking the search efforts. Years later, a new ranger assigned to the tower reported strange occurrences during storms. Static would fill the radio, followed by a faint, familiar voice whispering, "It's inside it. Don't let it catch you." Sometimes the voice would call the ranger's name, repeating Harper's warnings. The forest at Blackwood Ridge remained alive, patient, and ever watchful. And the story of the fire watcher's secret became a chilling lesson for every ranger who dared to stand alone, high above the trees. That some presences cannot be escaped, and some voices never fade. For most of us, parks are places of peace, hiking trails, sunsets, and wildlife. But for the rangers who live deep inside them, they're home to something else entirely. These stories remind us that not every mystery can be solved with logic. Sometimes the wilderness keeps its own secrets, buried under roots, echoes, and silence. The forests, mountains, and remote trails hold more than what meets the eye. What seems quiet, calm, and untouched can harbor eyes that watch, shapes that wait, and forces that are patient beyond imagination. So next time you walk into a forest and the air suddenly grows cold, remember, someone else might already be watching you.